On August 3, 2016, at 4:30 a.m., the Ruvan Nanaram International Airport in India was the site of preparations for a significant journey. The Boeing 73700ER was undergoing refueling in anticipation of its upcoming flight, which would cover a distance of 1,865 miles and take approximately 3 hours and 30 minutes. Flight EK 521 was scheduled to depart from Thiruvananthapuram International Airport and arrive at Dubai International Airport in the United Arab Emirates. The aircraft in operation was a Boeing 73700ER, often celebrated as a marvel of modern aviation. It stands as a symbol of pride for the airline and serves as a crucial component of the Emirates fleet. Powered by two robust Rolls-Royce Trent 892 engines, the Boeing 73700ER is recognized as one of the most sophisticated aircraft models, contributing significantly to Emirates' dominance in global air travel. Furthermore, Emirates ranks among the leading airlines worldwide, holding the fourth position in passenger revenue and second in cargo transport as of the current date. This particular aircraft, now 13 years old, has accumulated 58,183 flight hours and has transported a total of 13,626 passengers, primarily consisting of residents from India and the UAE, along with citizens from 18 other nations. The flight crew comprised 18 members, including 16 flight attendants and 2 pilots responsible for operating the cockpit. The captain, a 34-year-old pilot, had amassed a total of 7,457 flight hours, with 5,123 of those hours logged on Boeing 7300 series aircraft. The first officer, Jeremy Webb, aged 37, was among the select few Australians who successfully navigated through a competitive selection process to join Emirates. He had a total of 7,957 flight hours, including 1,292 hours on Boeing 7300 series aircraft. After all necessary procedures were finalized, EK 521 received clearance for takeoff from the runway. The two robust Rolls-Royce Trent 892 engines roared to life as the Boeing 777 gradually ascended, adhering to its designated flight path. The aircraft would proceed directly northwest, traversing the expansive Arabian Sea and the skies over Oman before arriving in Dubai. The captain was at the controls, while First Officer Jeremy Webb diligently monitored all systems to guarantee a smooth operation throughout the flight. As the plane attained its cruising altitude of 33,000 feet, the atmosphere within the passenger cabin became increasingly tranquil. Passengers were offered amenities and light snacks, all of which met 5-star standards. Meanwhile, the pilots engaged in discussions about their work and flight schedules. Despite it being their first collaboration, both the captain and the first officer demonstrated remarkable synergy, exchanging light conversation while remaining attentive to the instruments. By 8 a.m. EK 521 was approaching Dubai airspace at an altitude of 33,000 feet, allowing passengers and crew to glimpse the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, standing majestically in the sunlight. As with previous flights, the aircraft would glide past the 163-story tower and descend smoothly into Dubai International Airport for a safe landing. In the cockpit, the captain was preparing to brief the first officer on the approach procedure, a crucial step to ensure the flight was executed with precision. However, as they entered the final stages of their approach, the airspace over the United Arab Emirates' most advanced city began to show unexpected signs of turbulence. The flight crew received multiple alerts from the Automated Terminal Information Service, indicating that the weather conditions at Dubai Airport were deteriorating, with temperatures exceeding 40 Celsius, nearly 120 Fahrenheit. This extreme heat was accompanied by strong and unpredictable gusts of wind originating from various directions. Furthermore, warnings regarding wind shear, a hazardous phenomenon for aircraft, were issued for all runways at Dubai Airport around the time EK 521 was scheduled to land. For those unfamiliar, wind shear is characterized by abrupt changes in wind speed or direction over a short distance, often linked to thunderstorms or temperature inversions. In Dubai, this phenomenon arises from the interaction of hot desert winds and cooler breezes from the Persian Gulf. Low-level wind shear can significantly impact aircraft operations, particularly during takeoff and landing. At that moment, sea breezes began to replace the typical wind patterns, resulting in a conflict between the opposing wind currents at the airport. The captain and first officer promptly reviewed the wind shear warning, with the captain taking the opportunity to elaborate on the procedures for managing wind shear should they encounter it. Although they could depend on the aircraft's wind shear warning system, a notable concern was that these systems become inactive when the aircraft descends below 50 feet, precisely at the landing phase. In this context, the standard landing approach utilizing the instrument landing system and automatic landing system was in consideration. The previous approach was deemed impractical, therefore, the crew was instructed to utilize the required navigation performance approach or area navigation via GPS to reach runway 12L. This method necessitates meticulous preparation and precise control from both pilots. As the Boeing 777 descended, the captain reflected on a recent experience with thermal updrafts during warm weather. Thermal updrafts are essentially columns of warm air rising from the ground, akin to invisible balloons. This phenomenon is often observed on hot summer days, where it generates small dust whirlwinds and leads to abrupt changes in wind direction. While this serves as a natural advantage for birds and gliders, it can create positive wind shear, a potentially hazardous condition during landing. The captain had faced both wind shear and thermal updrafts numerous times throughout his aviation career in Dubai, where such occurrences are frequent, particularly over heated surfaces like runways. Nevertheless, he felt assured that these factors would not significantly impede the landing process. All technical parameters had been meticulously calculated, the flaps were adjusted to 30 degrees, and the wind speed had increased by 5 knots, resulting in a final landing speed of 152 knots. The anticipated touchdown speed was approximately 147 knots, with all figures remaining within safety margins. The captain was confident that he and the first officer were adequately prepared for any potential scenarios as they approached 8:17 a.m. EK 521 received instructions from Dubai Air Traffic Control to descend to 16,000 feet. The first officer promptly communicated with the controller to confirm that all operations were proceeding as planned. The controller then informed them that they could prepare for an RNP approach to runway 12L, as initially intended. However, the crew was unaware that 2 aircraft ahead had faced adverse wind conditions during their approach to the same runway and had to abort their landings. This critical information was not communicated to the pilots of EK 521, as the go-around instructions were only transmitted on the tower frequency, a different channel from the one they were using to communicate with air traffic control. Had the pilots of EK 521 been informed of this vital information, they would have approached with greater caution. Instead, the lack of communication became an unforeseen factor, placing the crew in an unpredictable situation. Meanwhile, in the passenger cabin, the head flight attendant announced that preparations for landing were complete. The crew swiftly began their final preparations, and the Boeing 777-300ER was approaching Dubai Airport. The captain instructed the deployment of the flaps, and both pilots proceeded with the landing checklist after air traffic control provided the final vector and clearance for the required navigation performance approach to runway 12L. The captain then ordered the landing gear to be lowered and set the flaps to 30, preparing for landing, with the speed brakes armed and the aircraft fully configured. The first officer swiftly completed the remaining items on the landing checklist, instilling confidence in the captain that they were on course for a safe landing. However, the crew was unaware of the unforeseen challenge that awaited them, poised to test their readiness and expertise. After successfully passing the 1,000-foot mark, all systems appeared normal. The approach controller transferred EK 521 to the Dubai Tower frequency, where 2 Boeing 777s had previously landed without incident. EK 521 promptly established contact with the tower and received clearance to land on runway 12 left, with surface winds reported from 340 at 11 knots. This indicated a headwind of 10 knots, which the crew had previously determined was within the aircraft's safe landing parameters. However, a critical piece of information was omitted by the controllers. The wind indicators at the opposite end of the runway were also indicating headwinds of a similar velocity, resulting in converging winds over the runway and creating a highly unpredictable scenario. At 8:36 a.m., As the aircraft descended to 920 feet, the captain opted to disengage the autopilot and take manual control for the remainder of the landing, while keeping the auto throttle engaged in accordance with company policy. At this juncture, the auto throttle was set to speed mode, enabling the captain to manually pilot the aircraft, while the system remained prepared to initiate a go-around if necessary. The time was 8:36:22 a.m. The aircraft descended to an altitude of 700 feet while traveling at a speed of 154 knots. At this point, the wind shifted unexpectedly from a headwind to a tailwind. Despite this sudden change, the aircraft continued its descent. As it passed through 450 feet, a warning from the system indicated minimums, prompting an immediate response from the captain. The speed had increased to 156 knots, but gradually decreased to 152 knots, remaining within the stable range for the approach. Upon reaching 190 feet, the first officer reported an increase in the tailwind to 16 knots, which the captain acknowledged. Despite the strong tailwind, the decision was made to proceed with the landing. Unbeknownst to the crew, a headwind of equal strength was present at the opposite end of the runway. As the aircraft descended to 115 feet, the first officer noted a decrease in the tailwind to 13 knots, to which the captain replied, "Check." At that moment, the ground proximity warning system activated, announcing 100. The aircraft crossed the runway threshold at 54 feet, and all appeared to be under control. However, the tailwind began to diminish, leading to an increase in the aircraft's speed. The auto throttle reduced thrust to idle in an effort to maintain a speed of 152 knots. Over the next 4 seconds, the ground proximity warning system issued repeated alerts: 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Typically, pilots rely on these alerts to determine the appropriate time to execute the flare. However, since the captain had initiated the flare earlier while the aircraft was still traveling at a high speed, they were utilizing more runway than anticipated. As the aircraft continued its descent, the captain gently increased the control inputs. The pitch angle was adjusted from 0 to 2.6, which reduced the descent rate from 700 feet per minute to approximately 350 feet per minute in preparation for touchdown at 8:37:7 a.m. At this time, the aircraft passed the 9,884-foot mark of the runway at an altitude of 35 feet, traveling at a speed of 159 knots. By 8:37:12 a.m. the aircraft was at 5 feet, with its speed increasing to 160 knots. At that moment, a sudden wind shift occurred, transitioning from a tailwind to a headwind. The displayed wind speed began to rise rapidly, indicating a light wind shear that, while not strong enough to activate the warning systems, posed a new challenge for the crew. The warning systems had been deactivated as the aircraft descended below 50 feet, necessitating that the pilots rely solely on their experience. Sensing the abrupt wind change, the captain promptly adjusted the right aileron to counteract the slight roll induced by the wind, striving to maintain the aircraft's balance in this unforeseen circumstance. At this juncture, the aircraft was merely 2 feet above the runway, traveling at a speed of 165 knots, contending with the unexpected increase in headwind. Despite being so close to the ground, the aircraft exhibited no signs of further descent at such a high speed and had already covered a considerable distance along the runway. Recognizing the situation, the captain endeavored to rectify it with a gentle correction. The aircraft's nose was pushed forward multiple times in an attempt to initiate the landing. However, the desired outcome was not achieved. The situation became increasingly complicated when the captain made adjustments to the right aileron to counteract the headwind. The right main landing gear made brief contact with the runway, prompting the landing gear sensors and tilt sensors to detect this interaction and automatically deploy the speed brakes. Nevertheless, once the right landing gear lifted off the ground, the speed brakes deactivated, reverting the aircraft to a standby state. Over the subsequent 6 seconds, both main landing gears touched down twice, resulting in the speed brakes deploying and retracting repeatedly. At 8:37:17 a.m. the right landing gear contacted the runway approximately 3,600 feet from the threshold of runway 12 left at a speed of 162 knots, followed by the left landing gear making contact 3 seconds later. However, the nose gear remained airborne. Both pilots, focused on external conditions, failed to recognize that the aircraft had already touched down, leading to a critical oversight. They mistakenly believed the aircraft was still in flight, a misunderstanding that would significantly influence subsequent events. As the aircraft traversed more than 3,281 feet of the runway, the captain realized that continuing in this manner would jeopardize a safe landing at 8:37:23 a.m. The captain made the decision to abort the landing and activated the takeoff go-around button. He also announced the go-around and began to elevate the aircraft's nose to initiate a climb. At this juncture, the captain was acutely aware of their proximity to the ground and was likely concentrating on avoiding a tail strike, which demanded much of his attention. However, an additional issue arose when the captain engaged the takeoff go-around button. The auto throttle failed to activate. This malfunction occurred because the aircraft had been below 2 feet for over 3 seconds or had made contact with the ground, as per the aircraft's design specifications. Consequently, the thrust remained in idle mode, and neither pilot recognized this oversight. The captain maintained his grip on the thrust levers but was unaware that the thrust was not increasing. His intense focus on preventing a tail strike may have led him to overlook this crucial detail. Immediately following the initiation of the go-around, the long landing warning sounded, affirming that the decision to abort the landing was indeed correct. At 8:37:27 a.m., the captain continued to pitch the nose up to 7.5 degrees and instructed the retraction of the flaps. 2 seconds later, the landing gear lever was moved to the up position, initiating the process of retracting the landing gear. However, the critical step of verifying the thrust was neglected by both pilots, likely due to their reliance on the auto throttle system. The aircraft ascended to an altitude of 77 feet, but its speed quickly plummeted to 135 knots, significantly below the safe threshold. Without the requisite thrust, the aircraft continued to decelerate at 8:37. At 8:37:28 a.m., the tower controller observed the aircraft pitching upward and granted clearance for it to proceed straight ahead while climbing to 4,000 feet. The first officer acknowledged this clearance and made the necessary altitude adjustments. However, this may have further diverted both pilots' attention from the critical situation at hand. Just 2 seconds later, the aircraft reached its maximum altitude of 85 feet, with its speed having decreased to 131 knots, which was inadequate to sustain altitude, particularly with the landing gear doors open, resulting in increased drag. Recognizing the perilously low speed, the captain suspected they were experiencing wind shear and urgently commanded a go-around. At that moment, the ground proximity warning system activated, alerting them with a "don't sink" warning. The captain then fully advanced the thrust levers and pressed the go-around button for the second time. The engines began to accelerate. However, it took 6 seconds for the two powerful Rolls-Royce engines to transition from idle to full power. Unfortunately, by that time, it was too late. At 8:37:38 a.m., 18 seconds after initiating the go-around procedure, the aircraft crashed onto runway 12 left. The tail struck the ground first, producing a loud screech, followed by the main landing gear and the right engine detaching from the aircraft. A significant fire erupted from the right engine shaft, spreading beneath the left engine and into the landing gear compartment. The aircraft continued to skid along the runway, gradually veering to the right until it came to a halt approximately 229 feet from the runway center line, facing a heading of 250 degrees. A little over a minute later, the captain issued a mayday call and announced the evacuation of the pilots. They located the evacuation checklist that had fallen to the cockpit floor during the crash and began implementing the evacuation procedures at the rear of the aircraft. Thick smoke emanating from the landing gear compartment started to infiltrate the cabin, inciting panic among the passengers. Many attempted to retrieve their carry-on luggage, which hindered the evacuation process. The crew called for an emergency evacuation, prompting passengers to begin using the escape slides to exit the aircraft. Firefighters arrived on the scene and commenced efforts to extinguish the fire. However, at 9:39 a.m. a significant explosion occurred when the fire reached the central fuel tank, resulting in the death of a young firefighter, Jim Issa al-Balushi. Several other firefighters were affected by the intense heat, which soared to nearly 122 f during the rescue operations. Although no passengers lost their lives, the explosion inflicted considerable damage, and this incident is regarded as one of the most severe aviation disasters in Emirates history. In response to the accident, the UAE's General Civil Aviation Authority promptly initiated an investigation into the serious incident involving EK 521, in collaboration with Emirates, Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, and Rolls-Royce, the engine supplier for the Boeing 777-300. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board also dispatched a team of 5 experts to assist other investigators. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were retrieved from the aircraft the following day to facilitate a comprehensive investigation. The preliminary investigation revealed that the pilots of EK 521 were unaware that the engine thrust on the Boeing 777-300 remained insufficient during the go-around procedure. This oversight triggered a sequence of critical events, particularly after the aircraft's main landing gear had already made contact with the runway.
The go-around maneuver resulted in the automation system losing control over the engine power, thereby creating a perilous situation throughout the landing approach and subsequent go-around. The flight crew did not adequately monitor or manage the primary flight instruments and failed to recognize that the auto throttle adjustment test did not activate after the captain engaged the takeoff go-around button. Consequently, the engine thrust did not increase as required, significantly impairing the aircraft's performance during a phase that necessitated maximum power. Alarmingly, the flight crew neglected the thrust verification procedure specified in the go-around and missed approach protocols outlined in the flight crew operating manual. An over-reliance on automation systems, coupled with insufficient preparation for a go-around close to the runway, directly contributed to the crew's inadequate performance during this critical phase. The final report underscored significant deficiencies in the flight crew's management of the emergency situation, culminating in one of the most serious accidents in Emirates' operational history.